Though society is now returning to normal following the COVID-19 pandemic, the effects continue to ripple through our lives. For many of us, work from home, freelancing, and what we are now calling the gig economy have become cornerstones of our vocabularies and our lives. Craig Lewis was a star basketball player in the NCAA, and then he took his talents to Europe. The lessons he got on the court and in the locker room helped him to transition to a new career as he launched a flourishing startup specializing in the modern post-pandemic workforce.
Craig Lewis is the founder and CEO of Gig Wage, a tech startup that's helping companies better manage their freelance payrolls. Gig Wage aims to help simplify how corporations navigate their post-pandemic freelance workforces. His business has raised more than $10 million to date.
Gig economy, we hear a lot about it. A lot of people don't understand it. Explain it to us.
Yeah, so the gig economy, I always laugh. It's not like it's really some new thing, it's just a new name. Independent contractors have been around forever, but what the gig economy is short-term labor powered by technology. So think about it, if you can push a button, do some work, and make some money like that, that's typically the essence of the real gig economy. But independent contractors, freelancers, people that work on their own, self-employed, proprietors, hundreds of years been around. It was actually before traditional work, right? You do some work, you get some cloth or a coin.
Right.
But independent contractors, short-term labor that's typically paid, not at some bi-weekly, weekly frequency. You can get it now, or and then you're responsible for your taxes, et cetera, especially in the U.S.
So talk to me about how you kind of landed in this space, because there's a lot of different businesses you can be in.
Well, I've always been fascinated by money. I've always been fascinated by work. My mom told me when I was a kid, she said, Craig, they used to call me Little Craig. My dad was Big Craig. I'm way bigger than him, but he was the dad. My mom would always say, there's nothing more important than your job. She said, your job is really important. And she really instilled that in me early. So I was always fascinated with money and work. And then when I discovered technology, that was really a moment for me. And I wanted to figure out how I could combine those two. And the gig economy was something I didn't know I was familiar with. But my dad was an independent contractor. He was a truck driver, uncles, my grandmother. And so it just kind of all came together. But the kind of aha moment, the light bulb, was when I took a sales job at a little small payroll company called ADP, Automatic Data Processing. It's the biggest payroll company in the world, right. About $100 billion, selling traditional payroll. And that's where I saw I could connect money, work, technology, all in one place. And so I became fascinated with how people get paid from the work that they do.
So that pathway took you where?
Well, that pathway took me to becoming obsessed with technology, money, and work. And I bounced around, learned a lot, and it really led me to Silicon Valley, where I then discovered another kind of layer to the career part, which was entrepreneurship and venture capital and, this audacity to build things that could change the world. And I thought, wow, what if I could bring that to payroll, technology, and the gig economy? And at the time, it wasn't quite the gig economy, but it was payroll and work. And they got bit by the kind of entrepreneurial bug and the venture capital bug, and it's been a fun ride ever since.
Inspired by his own experiences when he was younger and recognizing a gap in the market, Craig set off on his own.
And so then you say to yourself, okay, I see all these people out there creating businesses, and you see how it's done, but you run up and in talking to you, you're a really bright guy, you understand all this stuff,
sure.
but you run up against the fact that a guy like me can come out there and have a really bad idea and say, give me money, and here come the wheelbarrows full of cash.
Sure.
Not so easy for you. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Listen, first of all, I've never been afraid of a challenge. One of my favorite sayings is, I actually embrace complex problems, right? And, listen, race, bias, gender bias, any number of biases that exist in the human race, you're not getting rid of those, right? And so that's something I'm very comfortable with, but it's difficult, right? You look at the statistics, raising venture capital, which is a really small asset class, is difficult for anybody. Even if you see the big highlights, there's a very small pool of venture capital that gets deployed, that high risk money for big returns. So it's a tough space to be in, white, black, male or female, regardless. But then once those biases get introduced, it becomes even harder. So you're talking about the small asset class that is really coveted because it's where all the money's made, and then less than 1% goes to African Americans. And so for me, it was about facing that head on. I think my athletic background and the ability to take a challenge on head on and compete really helped. But yeah, I knew what I was walking into because the statistics were glaring, but I've always been up for the challenge.
Studies have found that less than 7% of tech workers and fewer than 3% of industry executives in Silicon Valley come from African American and Latino backgrounds. These figures didn't faze Craig. His athlete's mentality helped him rebound from every rejection.
So I guess one of the things you learn being an athlete is, you lose a game, but that doesn't mean you're going to lose the next game. And,
sure.
and you go out and you compete. And I think you kind of go at it from that standpoint. But it has to be discouraging, I think, when you go in and you've got a good idea and you lay it out. So what got you over that?
I call it bounce back time, and it's a thing that I learned in sports. Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods, all these different people, what you'll notice is when they miss a putt or miss a game-winning shot, if you watch really closely, everyone experiences disappointment. Their head drops. But the great ones, before they walk off the field or before they walk off the court, their head is up. And that's something you learn in sports, and it's bounce back time. How can you get over that bad play, the next play mentality? And so I just took that into entrepreneurship. And I remember the first time it clicked for me, I was still a sales rep. I had lost a deal, a big deal I was working on. I lost the deal, didn't get it, and it took me 2 weeks to bounce back. I don't know why my brain cataloged the time, but I knew it took me 2 weeks to get back to myself. And I said, I'm going to improve that. And so I've worked on that to now where, I lose a deal, we lose an account, an investor says no, seconds later, I'm ready to go.
With modern tech changing how we work and live, the words resilience and adaptability come to mind as being key to thriving in the modern world and workforce. Two traits Craig learned well from his life in sports, lessons passed down from his idols.
I think anybody like yourself who's got this talent thinks, man, I could be the next Kobe.
Yeah.
What happens when you realize, I'm not going to be the next Kobe? How do you pivot to what you do now?
Yeah, well, you find a new example. My Kobe, my LeBron, my Michael Jordan became a guy by the name of Robert Smith. Robert F. Smith, who is the founder of Vista Equity Partners. They are a private equity firm that invests in technology companies. And so once I decided to switch to business, I needed a new kind of North Star, a new shining example to follow. And you just find the Kobe in your arena, right? And my arena now is business and technology and venture capital. So I found my Kobe.
So let me ask you the question I'm sure everybody asks you. What does the future of business look like? I mean, what's the landscape like, do you think, moving forward?
Very different, right? As you start to see, millennials are the largest generation in today's workforce. Gen Z is coming into the workforce furiously and vigorously, and I think things are changing. People want to work when they want to work, how they want to work, where they want to work, and companies are starting to slowly adapt. But things are changing. You can work from whenever, wherever, however. What people actually want has changed. People are comfortable making less if they have a good work-life balance. And so all of those things are changing as technology continues to advance and a new generation of workers enter the workforce.
It's going to be interesting to watch, isn't it?
Extremely interesting, but we don't want to just watch. We don't want to be a witness. We're going to participate.
I'll watch.
We want to be modern, we want to be diverse, we want to be cool.
And adapting to those coming changes is exactly what Craig and GigWage have done. Putting it all on the line early on, the company now thrives. Freelance work grew by 20% from 2020 to 2021 in the United States because of the COVID-19 pandemic, a figure that's expected to only grow in coming years.
So talk to me about GigWage. How did it come about and what is it?
Yep. So GigWage is a payroll company for the gig economy. We help businesses pay freelancers, gig workers, 1099 workers, alternative workers, anything in the non-traditional sense. Like I said, I used to work for ADP where we sold payroll to businesses and help them pay traditional workers. And I've seen every type of payroll you could possibly think of. Payroll for nannies, payroll for babysitters, payroll for construction workers. I've seen it all. But in 2015, 2016, I read this report from McKinsey about the global independent workforce, AKA the gig economy. And I had one of those entrepreneurial aha moments that no one had built a payroll company for the gig economy. Everyone was focused on the gig worker, but not the companies responsible for providing the payment and the work. And I thought it was a wonderful opportunity for us to come in and bring operational excellence, efficiency, and all the nuances and differences that are applied to gig work to the payroll industry for companies.
Talk to me about that whole marching along, the idea to execution, to raising the money. I mean, it's great to sit down and talk to somebody, wow, it's amazing you did this, but there's a lot of sweat and tears.
Yeah, so when we started, right, I self-funded the company for about the first year of the company. I made money playing basketball, I made money selling enterprise software. So I've self-funded the company, which was really a big step because I was able to figure some things out along the way. Right around the 9th or 10th month into starting the company, I was able to raise capital from outside investors. So we raised about $750,000 after I had self-funded the company. So we had put, about $1.5 million into the company. We had built a team and we had a vision that was slightly different than GigWage to start. And then that's where the hard execution and operation part comes in. We hit every bump you could think of, every crevice, every crack in the road. We had every wrong turn you could think of, and we just had to continue to navigate it until we found our way to this thing called GigWage. And once we found that, things got a little bit easier because things got a little clearer. So, Steve Case, the founder of AOL, America Online, was one of our investors in our next round, and we started raising bigger capital for more institutional investors. But that execution in between fundraising is something that people don't talk about a lot. Fundraising is hard, but then actually putting that capital to work and creating something of value is equally as hard. Then you go to the next hard stage of fundraising again. And so it's just this roller coaster of raise money, hard, execute, difficult, and for a much longer period. And then you've got to go out and convince investors again that your baby is growing up and is finally beautiful.
Can the gig economy be a force for economic equality? I mean, how can it kind of change the landscape, do you think?
Yeah, it's already starting to do that. Well, our mission at GigWage is economic empowerment for all. But the gig economy is spearheading that. The ability to push a button and make money without bias immediately is very, very powerful. You'll see a lot of the underrepresented communities highly engaged in the gig economy. And let me say, I'll go on record and say, I've said it on national publications, the gig economy is not perfect. It's not perfect. It still needs improvement. But it allows people to push a button and make money. Think about that concept. It is very, very powerful. And so is it a force for economic empowerment? Absolutely.
Expect to be doubted. Okay.
Like many other CEOs and star athletes, Craig attributes much of what he's learned about leadership from the role models he has surrounded himself with.
You talked about Steve Case. He kind of hit it big early on in life. You're a young guy.
Yeah.
And I can tell you're a thinker. You spend a lot of time thinking about probably leadership. What's it like to spend some time with him? I mean, do you try and pick the brains of some of these guys? And what have you learned along the way?
I call it, it's a knack of mine. And one of the things I think is really important about leadership is self-awareness. Know what you're good at, know what you're bad at, know what you're great at. I have an ability to do what I call dance with giants. And Steve Case is one of those giants. And that means the ability to interact, provide value, and get value, right? Because I think the best way to receive value from those giants is to bring value to the table, a new insight, a new learning, a new way of thinking, whatever it may be. Man, but I pick their brains like no other. Now, I don't sit down and say, let me pick your brain, because actually people don't like that. But yeah, I'm looking, I'm learning, I'm listening. Sometimes just being in the room and seeing how the play is made is enough. It's not always a direct question. How do they move? How do they interact? What initiatives are they a part of? What non-for-profits are they involved in? Watch their press interviews. You know, in sports, we used to watch game film. We watch tape.
It's almost the way you describe it, it's two words. It's observing, but also absorbing.
Exactly.
We've talked a little bit about this, but I mean, you played basketball at a young age and really excelled at it and went off and played in Europe. So you undoubtedly had a lot of coaches along the way. Talk to me about being an athlete and learning about, leadership from the coaching standpoint, but also teamwork and all the different aspects that sports teaches you.
Yeah. So I wrote a book a number of years ago called The Sport of Sales, and it talks about the parallels between sports and sales careers. These are all things you pick up from sports, from your teammates, and yes, from your coaches. In the front of the book, I put a quote in from one of my college coaches, a guy by the name of Kyle Macy. He's a legend, Kentucky Basketball Hall of Fame, national championship, played in the NBA, played in Italy, led the NBA in free throw percentage, just a phenomenal guy and leader. And he gave us the definition of discipline when we got to school, and he said, discipline is doing what you're supposed to do, when you're supposed to do it, and doing it to the best of your ability each and every single time that you do it. Now, I'm 41 years old, and I still remember that as a 20-year-old kid, that quote about discipline. Those are the types of takeaways I got from playing sports and from being around these great coaches.
Among the lessons Craig's learned from his young but already storied career, sometimes you just need to be willing to take risks when you see an opportunity. And today he looks for investment opportunities with other like-minded entrepreneurs.
I've got one final question for you. I have a friend of mine, entrepreneur, very, very successful, and some of his story mirrors yours in that he went out and tried to raise money, and one of the first people he went to had a good chunk of cash and said, how much have you put in of your own? And he said, well, that's why I'm trying to raise money. He said, no, I want you to take your entire 401k, you got to have skin in the game. You got to put everything on the line and then come back and ask me for money. And you self-financing yourself early on, I think is kind of an illustration of the same sort of thing. How important is it for an entrepreneur to have that skin in the game, to really kind of, I mean, you're up against it. You have to succeed.
Sure.
How important is that?
So there's two schools of thoughts on this, and there's a new school of thought that is anti that thought process that exists today that says, no, you don't have to put it all on the line. I'm a little bit more old school. I do think there's something advantageous to doing that. That's why I did it. I'm now an investor in a number of companies. It's something I look for in investors as well. Other people that put their money, listen, it's your money. You can invest it in whoever you want, however you want. But I do think there's something special about someone who says, I have a good idea, or I have a good thing, and it's so good, and I believe in it so much that I'm going to put all of everything that I have into it. And then there's something that when the rubber meets the road, you also understand you're going to get the most out of that person because they also have skin in the game. So I think it's a really valuable thing for those that can. And a lot of people say, well, you say those that can. There's always something you can put in the game. No matter how little of whatever you have, there's something to put in there. I've seen people, credit cards, people have, put out the mortgage on their house or 401k. They've worked jobs on the side so that they can invest back in. There's always a way to invest in yourself. And again, as an investor in many companies now, before I could ever invest in other companies, I had to invest in my own. And before I could invest in my own company, I had to invest in myself. So I think there's something really powerful about that.
It does produce some sleepless nights though, right?
Many.
Thank you so much. It's a
Thanks
delight.
for having me. Appreciate it.